All right, so we're going to go over each of these do's and don'ts, but in a nutshell, you want your abstract to contain all of the pieces that a research paper would have. So starting with your problem statement, that problem or need, um, you want to be clear and concise, which is academic language, APA style. Here's where it gets to my pet peeve. Include your results in your abstract. We'll talk about why and how. And then, as it seems like common sense, but sometimes we forget that conferences and journals might have their own guidelines. So even though we're following in education and social sciences, APA, in business, I believe you all use APA for the most part. Is that right? Yeah. Um, every conference and journal will have their own particular or unique guidelines, and you have to follow them. You can risk rejection on that kind of technicality. In general, we don't cite sources in abstracts, and some journals will even say that explicitly. Do not cite sources. We want to avoid ambiguity. Don't forget the findings. If you if you learn anything from this session, that's include the results and findings in your abstract, and don't go over the word maximum. So you can go under, if it says write a 250 word abstract, you can go under, but it's like the price is right. You can't go over or you lose. You can be disqualified or your proposal can be rejected just for those technicalities. So as I said, we're going to go over each of these in more detail. So you're going to start your abstract the same way you would start a research paper. So what's the problem of practice? What are you hearing in the field that is an issue? Or what's the need? What's the need for this research? And the reason is that you want to hook your reader. So when you are submitting an abstract for a conference, you want your proposal to stand out from the 30 other abstracts that the reviewer is reading. So if you take the side, like take the perspective of the reviewer, you're reviewing abstracts for a conference. You've probably been assigned an entire section, which gets between 30 to 65 submissions in the conferences I've been to anyway. And so the reviewer is caring, and they care about the field. They care about the researchers, but they're busy people and they've got to get this done. This is volunteer work for them. So you want to capture their attention, grab their attention. All right. The other thing this does is it situates you with significance. This is significant because this is a real problem. There's a real need for this. There's an issue that this research is looking to solve or a gap that this research is going to fill. So here's an example. Our world is interconnected. However, current education standards do not address global competence. And I just saw the spelling error there, so forgive my typo. So one of the ways that we can talk about problems or needs, a gap in the research by context. So perhaps something has been studied in the business field, but it hasn't been studied in the health field. That's a gap in the research context. And that can be really, really narrow in the fact that sometimes when I talk about global education, which is mine, I say, although universities have implemented global competence in their vision for students or their program outcomes for students, K-12 has yet to research this. So the context can be the gap. The thing that CJ was talking about is a problem in the practice in the field, that there's an educator shortage. So her research is addressing that. All right. And then CJ asked, can we present on a topic that has been accepted for publication? This is yes for UMSL. So whenever there is an internal opportunity for you to present something, such as at UMSL when you're a student here, or when you get a job and there might be, for example, in the College of Education, we have a research symposium every September. The idea in those internal is not to make you do more work. The idea is to showcase the work that you're already doing. You can even present something that you've presented somewhere else. So you can present at AERA the same poster that you're going to present at UMSL Graduate Fair. Some conferences will flat out say you cannot present something that has been published. So be aware of that. And that is where it's really good to talk to your advisor. The hard and fast rule, at least in the conferences I go to, is that you not present the same research findings at more than one conference. In the same way that you wouldn't present the same research findings in more than one scientific article, more than one research article. So that doesn't mean you can't present the same study, just not the same findings. Does anyone know why that is? Like why you're not supposed to present the same findings at more than one conference? It can inflate the sense of those findings in the field. So it can seem like multiple studies have had these findings when in fact that's not true. It's one study. So it can appear to be corroboration when in fact it's not corroboration, it's the same findings. So what I tend to do is I take one large study that is one research article and I present, if I have 3 themes, I do a lot of qualitative research. So if I have 3 themes, I might present one theme at one conference and 2 themes at another conference. It just kind of depends on how they make sense together. Or if I do a mixed method study, I might present the quantitative survey results at one conference, but then present the qualitative in-depth findings at a different conference. And I do that for a couple reasons. Number one, conferences are typically either a poster, a roundtable, or a presentation, and there's not time to deliver a full study in that time. And secondly, that's academic capital, right? Like the more you present, the more you build your resume and the more audiences you reach with your work. So it's strategic in that sense too.
I have a question about not citing.
Yeah.
So if we say, like the second sentence you have on the slide, current education standards do not address global competence, I would
Mhm.
think if we were just writing that sentence normal in a paper, we'd want some citations to back that up, but not in the abstract.
Exactly. So you it is a bit of a fine line between what kinds of sentences you can put in your abstract that don't really need that. Um, but to me, this might not be general knowledge. So we know in APA you don't have to cite general knowledge, but it is just a fact that anyone could go look. Like you could go look and verify it yourself. Um, but in my paper, I definitely have citations and I have multiple citations for
Yeah.
that. But it doesn't seem so specific to any one study that the citation is, I'm not claiming someone else's work here as my own work by not citing. And that's the line you shouldn't cross. So when I do cite, it is possibly because I'm using someone's theoretical framework. Like if they coined a term and it's not general knowledge. So self-efficacy, I don't cite Bandura. Pretty much everyone in education, that's general knowledge, self-efficacy, Bandura. But if I'm going to use, I can't even think of one now, but a coined word that someone just came up with that I'm leaning heavily on, then I would cite them and I would just know that I'm breaking the rule. So we know that sometimes we can break rules, but we have to have a purpose and a reason for doing so, right? And then also I would only do that with a journal where the journal accepts citations or doesn't explicitly say no citations. Some journals flat out say no citations. Some conferences flat out say no citations. The other way around that is to say, using Bandura's with possessive self-efficacy theory and go on. Whereas in my writing, I would just use the citation. Yeah. Good question. In academic writing, clarity and conciseness are queen. They are the head of the monarchy. We know that. And nowhere is it even more important than the abstract, because typically in an abstract, you have between 100 and 250 words. So, just as an exercise in conciseness, look at this first sentence. She circled around the parking lot looking for an empty space. If you were an editor, and although this would never appear in an abstract, we're just looking about conciseness. What word is unnecessary in that sentence? I'll read it again. She circled around the parking lot looking for an empty space. Anyone want to unmute and explain your thinking?
I said empty because it's implied, so it adds extra wordage, verbiage that's not necessary.
Yeah, I don't know anyone in my entire life that has circled a parking lot looking for a space that was filled, right? Like that just, so you can infer that you needed an empty space. So she circled around the parking lot looking for a space. Means the same thing. And I know I said one word, but there's really two. So what's the other word that we could get rid of?
Around.
That's right. Around. So circled already gives us that visual image of going around. But in conversational speech, we tend to use that circled around the parking lot. But in an abstract, you could just say, she circled the parking lot looking for a space. If you were getting really desperate, you could remove the word parking depending on what was in your sentence above or below. Like if above it, we already know that she's driving, then we might not need parking. But in this sentence, removing the word parking could change the meaning because she could be circling some other kind of lot. All right, here is another one. This one is about clarity. Data were collected during the pandemic with a small sample, and instructional delivery shifted midway through the semester. This limits the generalizability of the results. There's a word here that is ambiguous. All right, people are writing in the chat. Oh, we actually have different. Okay, CJ, why did you say small?
Yeah, I think small is relative to the population of study. So small for one classroom group of students could be two students, but in a school that could be 20 to 25. So I would prefer like n equals some kind of specific number.
I totally agree with that. So small is relative. And then both Rosie and Ronnie said this. Either one of you want to unmute and explain why this can be ambiguous?
Well, because we don't know what this is. It the data? Is it the small sample? Is it the instructional delivery? It could mean anything.
It could mean any of this. It could mean the data. It could mean the small sample. It can be the instructional delivery. It could be the shift. Like, what is it that's limiting the generalizability? And typically, I find researchers use the word this when they mean all. So all of those factors could limit the generalizability or not. And the word this is ambiguous. So in your writing, if you can remove the word this, your writing will become more clear. In an abstract, we tend to use this because we want the word this because we're trying to not repeat words. We're trying to not be redundant. But see if there's another way to communicate that. Another way could be to combine sentences. So a comma, all of which limit the generalizability of the results rather than this limits. That does add a few words, but it is more clear. It's more clear, not as clear as Ronnie was saying, as being specific. So the other reason I tend to use this when I'm writing is because I'm not even sure exactly what I'm talking about. Like I know that all of this is doing something, but it's really complex and I don't know how to articulate it. So I use ambiguous language when my brain isn't clear. So sometimes it's doing the hard work of unpacking our own thinking so that we can then communicate clearly to others. And so I tend to write my abstract last just for that thought. Until I'm clear of what my paper is saying, it's really hard for me to be clear and concise about it. So even though the conference and the UMSL conference is only asking for an abstract, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't already kind of have your full idea fleshed out. The other thing about being clear is avoiding jargon. Now, this is especially true for the UMSL Graduate Research Fair because people who are not in your field are going to be the ones who are reviewing this. So this is going to be interdisciplinary, which is great. It's awesome. I love it for being interdisciplinary, but it's really important to not use jargon because we want to be clear. Then we'll talk a little bit more about that either in this session or the next session. Okay. The other thing to be concise about is your methods. This is where you should use not jargon, but technical language because technical language acts as shortcuts to other researchers. So for example, if I use the word narrative inquiry, I don't also have to say qualitative because narrative already implies stories, which is already going to imply qualitative. If I say, experimental, then I don't necessarily need to say that I had a control group. Now, maybe I do if I have enough words to that will just justify that the methods I did are what I'm saying. But the methods to me are a place in the abstract to keep it short. We want to know what you did, but we'll judge what you did in your methods section. Your abstract, for me, when I'm reading abstracts, I want to know why is this significant? Why should I even bother reading your full paper? And then the reason I want to know your findings is because the rule of thumb, which is an idiom to mean kind of like the guideline that isn't written anywhere, is that you can cite someone in an in-text citation in parentheses if you've read their abstract, even if you haven't read their whole paper. Now, if you're going to critique or engage with someone's research in your paper, not just put their name in a parentheses in a list, then you need to read the whole thing. But yes, the rule of thumb is that if you read the abstract and you can put them in the citations. And I want people to do that with me. I don't want to be the too long didn't read. I want to get those citations. So when I'm writing my abstract, I want to get people's attention. This is important. You should care about this, even if you didn't before you came across my article or my conference session. And I want to put my findings and implications in there. The implications are what our practitioners, our policymakers, our public, and we want to be speaking to our public. And so that's what they care about. Once I read your abstract and I want to learn more, then I'll invite you to present at the conference so I can learn more. Once I read your abstract and I'm, doing library research, then I'll pull your article and read your article because I want to learn more. And that's where you get to tell your whole story about your methods. So here's an example of some things that some ways that you can throw this technical language in there, and then move on. Participants included, that gets at the context, and that gets at your methods. And then using thematic analysis, comma, data showed, and then the findings. So I'm really just putting my methods as a introductory stem to my findings section or my results section. Okay, and as I said at the beginning, follow the instructions. Typically, if it says APA, it means APA 7 or the most recent version that's out there. Underword count is better than overword count. And there's a difference between a structured abstract and an unstructured abstract. Has anyone encountered that before and can tell us about their experience with a structured abstract? Okay.
I do have a guess, Dr. Shea.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I've seen some abstracts where it tells you the headings that you should use. So like it'll have a findings section, it'll have a method section, and then some of them are just one or two large chunks of like paragraph text.
Yes. There used to only be one journal that I knew of that did structured abstracts, but now there's more journals that are doing this. And so it tells you right here. So this is a journal called English Teaching, Practice, and Critique, which in addition to doing global education, I also do English education and literacy education as my research areas. And they actually have subheadings. So the first subheading is purpose, and then a little blurb. The next subheading is design, methodology, approach, and a blurb. Findings or results, but we typically use findings and qualitative and results for quantitative. And then originality, which is kind of that the gap you're filling. Like, so the purpose might be more about the need and practice or policy, and then the originality is more about the gap in the research or the context. And then if you have research implications, practical implications, and social implications, you should have at least one set of implications. But if you have more than one, then you can include all of those. However, it still has to be 250 words in total or less. Okay, does that make sense? Questions about that? All right, so going through the don'ts, which is just kind of going to be saying the same thing, but in different words. Learning theory says we need to hear things multiple times for it to become sticky in our brains. So this is a time to avoid informal language, but you still want to use plain language and avoid jargon. So, oh my goodness, another typo. I made this in Canva and it was really small, so I couldn't even see my typing. I apologize. But here is what one of my professors told me, and it always stuck with me. Her writing was so clear. Jessica DeGuere Gunby was my professor, and she said, imagine you're talking to your neighbor at the mailbox, and they're like, so, what are you working on? What would you say? Like, what is it that you would say that would kind of capture somebody else's attention? And typically your audience is going to be smart, right? Like, so you can be complex, but they're not necessarily in your field. And so that's why we want to spell out abbreviations. Don't bother putting the parentheses with the letters unless you're going to use it again in your abstract, because that will count as a word. So like the NPS, you can spell out the NPS. You don't have to put parenthesis NPS unless you're going to be using NPS again in your abstract. So your audience is smart, but they're not necessarily in your field. That's who you should be thinking of when you're writing your abstract. The abstract typically is not behind a paywall, right? Whereas your actual journal article or your actual conference presentation will be. Avoid ambiguity. So here's my pet peeve right here. This sentence. And I see this all the time. This study has implications for research policy and practice. Period. End of abstract. That tells me not like I hope so. I hope you didn't do research that has no implications for anybody. But it really doesn't tell me anything, and it's ambiguous. So tell me what the implications are. Tell me what they are. Write in that abstract. Okay, what questions do you have about what we've talked about so far? And it can be even specific to a conference. Some of you are in the same field and might have experiences, or to a journal. Or what is it that you are just wondering about when it comes to writing abstracts?
I'm kind of curious. Whenever I've written an abstract, to me, it's like one of the last things I do. Like I do the research, I write the paper, I double check my citations, make sure everything's formatted right, and then do the abstract. I assume that's the norm. We don't like use it as kind of an outline of this is my research, this is what my lit review is. It's not. Do people ever go the opposite way?
I'm like you. I like to do it last because that's when I'm the most clear about what my paper is saying. Therefore, I feel I can use clear language. However, sometimes that abstract can be helpful when doing collaborative writing, and you're going to then delegate the different sections. So you have to have some sort of roadmap, and a structured abstract can give you that roadmap to then kind of go out and have other people. The other thing that is similar to an abstract is an LOI, a letter of inquiry. And a letter of inquiry is when a grant giving institution, before they invite people to submit full grants, will invite letters of inquiry, which are typically no more than a page, where you introduce yourself as the investigator, as well as what you would do, which is basically the abstract of a study. And so sometimes, in those sense, though, implications would be like may include like implication. The hope is that there will be implications for policy, and then you can say period because it hasn't happened yet. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then sometimes it can be hard at the end because you've already said so much that you kind of lose. Okay, what's the main idea here? I have actually revised my abstract after getting reviews from my article back or reviews from my conference proposal back. Not conference proposal, and I'll tell you why next, but reviews from journal article submissions, because the peer reviewer starts with a summary of my research and a summary of the significance from there. And as that outsider, they see it so much more clearly than I could now that I'm down in the weeds. And when I do that, I always thank the reviewer in my acknowledgments, like, thank you to the reviewer who helped me clarify, my significance of this study or something like that. Conference proposals, however, typically whatever you submit into that submission system for the abstract is what goes on the conference program. So that abstract isn't only speaking to reviewers, it's also speaking, it's your advertisement to the people at the conference to come to your session. So there isn't typically an opportunity to revise because they just want to pull them straight from the submission system. Rosie, do you have a question?
Yes. Would you ever include your research questions in your abstract?
I don't, but I would flip it as a purpose statement. So yeah. Yeah, I never have. Good question. Okay. Ready to move on to posters? And if this doesn't apply to you, feel free to come and go as the session relates to your work. So the next part of tonight's session was to talk about effective posters. So again, in the field of education, our huge conference, the American Education Research Association Conference, is coming up next month. And it's not unusual for graduate students to be presenting posters. And also the UMSL Graduate Research Fair is a poster session. So some do's and don'ts for creating posters. Do include an interesting title. Posters are your chance to kind of play a little bit. When we present papers at a conference, there's a pedestal in or podium. You're literally behind the podium. Sometimes there is like a pedestal or a stage, like a little one that people are on. It's a very formal kind of experience. Poster sessions, if you've never been to a poster session at a conference, they remind me of a science fair in elementary school. Like that's where science fairs, I think, kind of, it trickled down from the research, the scientific research world. So there's room to play, and I love to play with language. So for my poster titles, this is where I might use figurative language. I love to use idioms. So like earlier, I used that idiom rule of thumb. So maybe if I was doing a research presentation on human thumbs, I would, rule of thumb, 3 new findings of human thumbs or something like that. So idioms can be fun, metaphors, similes. Another one shifting into neutral was the beginning of ours, and it was about how you can't be politically neutral in a classroom because being silent about a topic is also a statement about a topic, like it's saying it's taboo or can't be talked about. So that was kind of the shifting into neutral political discussions in the classroom. So use an interesting title, but still be clear and concise in your posters. Again, you're still using APA. You do want a reference list on your posters. So this is the time that if you have citations and you have like 4 in the list, maybe you choose the newest one, or maybe you choose the foundational one, but maybe you don't have all 4. And then as always, follow the conference or journal guidelines because they might have a particular structure you want. Don't use words when you can use a visual. That's the other beauty of posters. Don't make the text too small. If you can't read it, your audience can't read it either. And don't overclaim. You only have so much room on a poster, but you do need to be precise and accurate with your language. Okay. So actually, I feel like I kind of already went over this. I kind of said everything I was going to say on these slides. Let me see. Oh, one thing I didn't really, okay. One of the things you can think about for your title is your main point. Like, what do you want your audience to walk away with? You can't include everything on a poster. So think about like if you were talking to your neighbor at the mailbox, what is it that you want them to walk away like, oh yeah, Chris's research is on blah 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 blah. He found this really interesting blah blah blah. That's the thread. Keep that common thread all the way through. And if it doesn't help your thread, if it doesn't link to your thread, then don't put it on the poster. There's not room for everything, and it's better to be clear. If you bring something up, you have to unpack it. So it's better to not bring something up than to bring it up and not unpack it in the poster. So, what do you want your audience to walk away with, and stick to that common thread. The other thing I wanted to say about like, what's your main point and what do you want your audience to walk away with is that you should at a poster session, this isn't about design, but this is about the actual poster session. You should engage with your audience. So if you haven't studied public speaking body language before, one of the things that they talk about is like an open stance versus a closed stance. So having your body positioned not with your back to the audience, but you want to be angled out, inviting, welcoming people to come in to your poster space. And you want them to come in, you want them to engage with your work. So you have to say that to yourself. I think sometimes people are like, I don't want to talk to anybody. And that then comes through body language. And so tell yourself you do want people to engage with this work. It's important work, it's important topics. And you can use open body language, smile, welcome them in to your poster space, and engage with them. Okay, visuals. Think about your art education from K-12. What do you remember? What do you remember about your visual arts classes? What were some of the things that your art teacher taught you? Like, I'm literally asking. So you can unmute and just like shout them out. What do you remember from art class?
Contrast.
All right, what's contrast?
The um like the way that things stand out from each other and or do not stand out from each other.
What else do you remember? Anyone?
You wouldn't want to like crowd the space or make it too busy.
Yeah. All right, somebody give me one more thing.
Make it eye-catching.
Okay. Visually appealing. Yeah. All right. So, okay. So thinking about contrast, typically a color scheme is going to have high contrast and then some attention grabbing. So the pleasing. So if you look at this color scheme of this slide, you'll see that there's, it's actually navy blue. So this is navy blue and white, which is high contrast, but not as high contrast as black and white. So black and white are the highest contrast and can be pretty stark. So I like to use a dark gray or a navy blue or a deep shade of green if I'm not using UMSL colors, because that can clash with red and gold. But so we want some high contrast, especially with our text that we want people to read. So this white against the turquoise is just enough of a contrast, but you can tell it doesn't stick out quite as much as that blue against the white. That navy blue against the white sticks out more. So this also is about accessibility. So when we are teachers in our teaching spaces and we're designing for inclusion for students who may have visual impairments, that contrast is really important too. So if we have a dark color on the background, we're going to use white or light gray or light blue for the text. If we have a white or light background, we're going to use dark colors. So you want that contrast with your dark background, light text, light background, dark text. As Rosie was saying, you don't want everything crowded. Consider that's the negative space. You should have negative space in there too. There should be visual space that helps people see what goes together and what doesn't go together. If it's overwhelming, people may not even engage, right? So if it looks chaotic or if it looks like too much, people won't engage. And that's where it's better to think strategically about what you're going to put on there, because you're not going to have room for everything. But what you do put on there is symbolic. So you might remember in art that you talked about line and color theory. So if lines are dotted, that tends to mean that there isn't as strong of a connection as when a line is solid. If there's an arrow at the end of the line and it only goes one way, that indicates that it's a directional relationship. If there's an arrow at the end of both lines, that seems to be that there's reciprocity. So when you're making the visuals, really think about all of the elements you're using and making sure that they are communicating the relationships that you want to be communicating. As far as colors with research posters, typically you would use the colors of your institution. So at UMSL, that would be Triton red and gold. And I have a research poster template for you that has those colors from our Marcom department already in there that I'll share with you in a second. And the font too. You want a font that isn't too informal, but that is easy to read. That's the most important thing. Again, if you can't read it, your audience isn't going to be able to read it. So contrast can help with legibility, the typography, the font you use, and then also the hierarchy. So making font bigger and bolder for subheading, for headings and subheadings, that kind of typography can also help indicate the hierarchy, the organization of the ideas. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing for a second. What questions do you have about posters? CJ.
Yeah, Dr. Shate, when I was at UMSL previously, the print services was an option for printing posters, and then you would like pin it to you'd have to get a board and you'd pin it to it. Is that still an option? And what does funding for that look like?
Okay, so at the UMSL, okay, so printing posters, yes. Typically posters are 36 by 42 inches or 36 by 50 something inches. So you're thinking like a yardstick. Wait, right? Yeah, a yardstick, 36 inches by whatever you want. And you can get them printed on paper with UMSL Print Services, which is print@umsl.edu, but you have to have a funding code for that. So COE people, there are research grants, but they only happen twice a year. So that might not be available. You also can get printed, you can also print at like Office Depot, those kinds of places. They can print too. The new thing now though is to print on fabric. So so if you were going to like AERA, which is in LA, in my day, you would go to Office Depot, print it on paper, roll it up, get a like mailing tube, carry it. It doesn't fit anywhere. You don't want to check it because that costs money, it's a whole thing. But now you can actually get it printed on fabric. Is that one, Rosie, on fabric? And then you can fold it and put it in your suitcase.
Yeah, it's from a work conference. And so like it's so easy and like you can honestly just like steam it from the back and it's so much better than a tube.
Yeah.
Yes.
I I wouldn't pay, I don't remember how much they cost, but I wouldn't pay more than 50. Is that right anymore? Yeah. I always just self-funded mine because I didn't have funding for that. Yeah. Okay, here. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, for the UMSL Research Fair, I think it also said you were responsible for bringing your own backing.
Okay, thank you for reminding me the rest of that question. Yes. So what I see at the UMSL Research Fair often are the trifolds that you can get at the dollar store. So they're probably $1.25 now instead of $1. But you can get those trifolds and then you can print PowerPoint slides because you can print 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And it's basically more more just like, yeah, PowerPoints. If you do an actual poster, then get the trifold and measure what it would be like so that you can make it 36 by whatever the width is. This, oops. So I put in the chat the UMSL research poster template. That is a 36 by 50 something, just FYI. But you can always go to the slide size to change this size of the slide. All right, other questions? Anything else? All right. Well, thanks so much for being here. All right, see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.